What does financial freedom really mean? For most of us, it's a finish line. It's that magic number in our bank account that lets us quit the job, travel the world, and live life on our own terms. But what if I told you that for the man who built a global empire on a simple cup of coffee, reaching that finish line wasn't the goal? It was just the starting point. In the crisp morning air of 1987, a man named Howard Schultz stood in a bank, holding a check for nearly $4 million. He was about to buy a small, local coffee company called Starbucks. But just 3 years earlier, he was a salesman earning $75,000 a year. He wasn't even one of the original founders. What happened in those 3 years? And more importantly, what did he discover about money, risk, and success that could fundamentally change the way you see your own life? My name is Fanko, and my passion is to explore the stories of extraordinary lives to find wisdom for our own. Many people think financial freedom is about earning enough to escape work, but the story of Howard Schultz offers a radically different answer. This is the story of a young man from the housing projects of Brooklyn, who, in a single decade, transformed himself from a salesman into the master of a business empire. It's a journey that saw him rejected by 217 investors just to get the funds to buy Starbucks. A journey where he nearly went bankrupt 3 times, mortgaged his home, and borrowed from every friend he had. But in the end, he didn't just achieve financial freedom, he completely redefined it. Today, I want to walk you through 3 true stories from his life. 3 moments that take us inside the mind of Schultz and reveal how he thought about money, risk, and success. These insights might just make you rethink the choices you're making in your own life. Let's begin with our first story, the thunderstorm awakening and the Seattle discovery. The year is 1982. The city, New York. It was a sweltering summer night, the air thick and heavy with the promise of a storm. In an apartment on the east side of Manhattan, a 28-year-old Howard Schultz sat by the window. He wasn't reading any single book, but through his constant reading and reflection on his own life, a profound sense of anxiety had taken hold of him. The rumble of thunder grew closer, each clap like a drumbeat against his soul. He put down his business magazine, walked over to the mirror, and stared at his reflection. A handsome face, a well-tailored suit, the very picture of a successful sales executive. At this point in his life, he was the head of the American division for Hammerplast, a Swedish kitchen equipment company. He was earning $75,000 a year, a fantastic salary at the time, excelling at his job with a future that looked blindingly bright. By any conventional measure, he should have been content. Consider where he came from, the public housing projects of Brooklyn, one of New York's poorest communities. His father, Fred Schultz, was a blue-collar worker who spent his life bouncing between tough jobs, delivering milk, driving trucks, working in factories. He never had a stable career and certainly no benefits like insurance. When Howard was 7, his father slipped on a sheet of ice while making a delivery and broke his leg. With no workers' compensation, the family was plunged into crisis. To this day, Schultz remembers the sound of his mother, Betty, crying softly in the kitchen that winter, and the look of utter despair in his father's eyes as he lay on the couch, his leg in a cast. It was the look of a man completely defeated by life. From that moment on, a vow took root in young Howard's heart. He would never, ever live his father's life. He studied relentlessly, earning a football scholarship to Northern Michigan University, becoming the first person in his family to graduate from college. After graduation, he leveraged his natural talent for sales to climb the corporate ladder step by step to his current prestigious position. You could say he had already made it. He was infinitely more successful than his father. But on this stormy night, a powerful realization struck him with the force of lightning. Even with his high-ranking title and hefty salary, as an employee, he was not free. Schultz walked back to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. He started to dissect his daily life. He'd wake at 7 a.m., put on the corporate uniform, and catch the 8 a.m. bus. At the office, he answered to his superiors, chased sales targets set by the company, and sat through endless meetings. His income was good, yes, but most of it was a mirage. It flowed in one hand and out the other, to the mortgage, the car loan, the endless stream of bills. More importantly, his entire livelihood was tied to this single job. If the company decided to downsize tomorrow, or if his performance dipped, he would lose almost everything. He felt the immense weight of what felt like 3 invisible walls boxing him in. The first wall was his boss. No matter how hard he worked or how much profit he generated, the lion's share went to the company. His earning potential had a ceiling, one determined not by his ability, but by his employer. The second wall was the government. As a high-income earner, a significant portion of his salary was consumed by taxes before he even saw it. The third wall was the bank. He lived in a nice apartment and drove a respectable car, but they weren't truly his. They were financed by loans. Each month, he was effectively working for the bank. The thunder cracked louder, the rain now hammering against the window. Schultz realized that while his life was materially better than his father's, in essence, he was still just a well-paid laborer. He still lacked true control. He recalled a book he had recently read, Think and Grow Rich, where author Napoleon Hill argued that true wealth isn't about having more money, but about owning the system that creates money. Schultz barely slept that night. He was consumed by a single question: how could he break free and achieve real financial freedom? The next morning, as he put on his suit and tie, he knew something inside him had fundamentally shifted. He wasn't just going to work anymore. He was going to hunt for an opportunity that would transform him from an employee into a creator. That opportunity soon appeared in the most unexpected way. A few months later, back at the office, Schultz noticed a peculiar pattern. His company, Hammerplast, sold coffee-making equipment, primarily to restaurants and coffee shops. But there was one small client from Seattle whose orders were strange. They consistently ordered the company's most advanced drip coffee makers, and in quantities that far surpassed any other store of their size. The client was called the Starbucks Coffee Company. Schultz was intrigued. Why would a small-time coffee bean retailer need so much professional-grade equipment? What on earth were they doing over there? That weekend, Schultz made a decision. He was going to fly to Seattle and see this mysterious coffee shop for himself. He didn't know it yet, but this trip to a city he'd never visited would alter the trajectory of his entire life. It was a spring morning in 1981 when he landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. As Schultz stepped out of the terminal with his suitcase, he was greeted by the damp, fresh air unique to the Pacific Northwest. Compared to the relentless energy of New York, Seattle felt calm, artistic, and serene. He rented a car and drove to the address he had, Pike Place Market, Seattle's oldest farmers market, and the location of the very first Starbucks store. The moment Schultz pushed open the door, he was enveloped by an intoxicating aroma of rich, dark-roasted coffee. It was nothing like the instant coffee he was used to. It was complex, deep, and utterly captivating. The store's interior was distinctive. Dark wood shelves were lined with bags of coffee beans from all around the world, and nautical-themed decor hung on the walls, creating a warm, almost mystical atmosphere. "Hello, welcome to Starbucks," said a bearded, middle-aged man who approached him with a genuine smile. "I'm Jerry Baldwin, one of the founders. Are you here for some coffee beans?" Schultz introduced himself and explained why he had come. Jerry's eyes lit up immediately. "Oh, you're the sales manager. We're big fans of your company's equipment. Come on, let me show you our operation." The next 2 hours left Schultz completely spellbound. He saw the Starbucks roasting workshop, where a vintage roaster imported from Holland was humming rhythmically. Jerry operated the machine himself, periodically pulling out a small sample of beans, meticulously inspecting their color and inhaling their fragrance. "Roasting is an art," Jerry explained as he worked. "Every type of bean has its optimal roast profile. 1 degree too hot, 1 minute too long, and the flavor is completely different. Schultz noticed a special glint in Jerry's eyes as he spoke, the unmistakable passion of someone who truly loved their craft. It was an expression he rarely encountered in the corporate world of New York. What impressed Schultz even more was the professionalism of the Starbucks staff. When a customer came in to buy beans, the employees didn't just ring them up. They engaged in a conversation, asking about the customer's preferences, explaining the characteristics of beans from different regions, and even demonstrating brewing methods on the spot. "We don't just sell coffee beans," said another founder, Gordon Boker, as he walked by. "We're sharing a culture, a deep understanding, and respect for coffee." That afternoon, Jerry invited Schultz to his home for dinner. In Jerry's living room, Schultz heard the full story of Starbucks. In 1971, Jerry, Gordon, and a third friend, Zev Siegel, pooled their money, took out a bank loan, and opened their small coffee shop. Their goal was simple: to introduce high-quality, dark roasted coffee culture to America. They were inspired by the Dutch coffee master Alfred Peet, the founder of Peet's Coffee, and wanted to bring his philosophy to the masses. But what truly struck Schultz was learning about the challenges they had faced. Jerry told him the company's performance was far from stable. In the late 1970s, Seattle's largest employer, Boeing, had undergone massive layoffs, shrinking its workforce from 100,000 to just 38,000. The entire city's economy was reeling, and people cut back on non-essential purchases, including premium coffee beans. "There was a time we almost had to shut down," Jerry confessed. "But we held on, and we discovered something unexpected. Economic hardship actually created new opportunities." "What kind of opportunities?" Schultz asked. "First, rents dropped, so we could afford better locations at a lower cost. Second, and more importantly, people started seeking higher quality in their lives. Even with less income, they were more willing to pay for something genuinely good. It was the beginning of a consumer upgrade." Jerry's words sent Schultz deep into thought. He began to understand that a crisis is often a hidden opportunity. It all depends on your perspective. After dinner, Jerry drove Schultz back to his hotel. In the car, Schultz asked the question that had been nagging him all day. "Jerry, why don't you expand? You have such a fantastic product, such a dedicated team. Why not open more stores?" Jerry was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Howard, we don't want to sacrifice quality for scale. We believe in the value of being small and beautiful. We'd rather be an excellent local coffee shop than a mediocre chain." The answer both enlightened and perplexed Schultz. He understood the founder's commitment to quality, but he also saw an enormous, untapped business opportunity. That night, Schultz lay awake in his hotel bed, his mind racing. An idea was taking shape, an idea that would consume him. What if he could take the Starbucks philosophy and product and bring it to all of America and maybe even the world? In 1982, after a year of relentless thinking and numerous trips back and forth, Schultz made the most important decision of his life. He had to join Starbucks. He returned to New York, convinced his wife, and gave up his high-paying job. The family packed their lives into a car and moved across the country to Seattle, where he would become the director of marketing and retail operations for Starbucks. And that brings us to our second story, a clash of ideologies and a point of no return. In the spring of 1983, Schultz officially began his new life at Starbucks. The day he and his wife, Sherry, moved to Seattle, they drove for 3 days and 3 nights in a car packed to the roof with their belongings. Sherry was an interior designer who had given up her career in New York to follow him. It was a leap of faith that required immense courage. "Are you sure this is the right move?" she asked as they drove through a small town in Nebraska. Schultz gripped the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the long, straight road stretching to the horizon. "I'm not sure how it will turn out," he said, "but I'm absolutely certain that if I don't try this, I will regret it for the rest of my life." Once in Seattle, they rented a small apartment, and Schultz dived into his new role. His salary was less than what he made in New York, but he had received a small amount of equity in Starbucks. It was the first time in his life he owned a piece of a company. For the first few months, Schultz immersed himself in the work. He studied the nuances of coffee, learned the art of roasting, and memorized the characteristics of every bean. The world of coffee, he discovered, was far more complex and fascinating than he had ever imagined. But it didn't take long for him to see the problem. The three Starbucks founders shared a deep friendship and a common philosophy, but they also had clear limitations. They were content with Starbucks' status as a beloved local brand and had no desire for large-scale expansion. More critically, they insisted that Starbucks should only sell coffee beans, not brewed coffee drinks. In 1983, the company sent Schultz to Milan, Italy for a trade show. It was there that he experienced Italian coffee culture for the first time, and it was a revelation. The streets of Milan were dotted with small espresso bars. People would stand at the counter, quickly down a shot of espresso, and continue with their day. The baristas operated the machines with effortless skill, chatting warmly with the customers. The entire experience was filled with a sense of ritual and community. Schultz had an epiphany. This is what coffee was supposed to be, not just a beverage, but a lifestyle, the centerpiece of a community. It was the third place between home and work. When he returned to Seattle, he excitedly described his discovery to the founders. He proposed that Starbucks start selling espresso drinks and create a similar social experience in their stores. He was met with fierce opposition. "Howard, we are a coffee bean company, not a restaurant." Jerry's tone was firm. "We don't know the food service business, and we don't want to learn it. Our expertise is in roasting and selling beans. We need to stay focused on that." Schultz tried to persuade them, but every discussion ended in a heated argument. He began to feel frustrated and isolated. After months of lobbying, he finally got permission to run a small experiment. In the spring of 1984, in a new store on Spring Street in downtown Seattle, he was allowed to set up a small section as an Italian-style espresso bar. On opening day, Schultz arrived at the store before dawn, personally calibrating the espresso machine and training the staff. His palms were sweating. He knew this was his one shot to change the destiny of Starbucks. At 9 a.m., the doors opened. The first customer was a man in a business suit who ordered a latte. Schultz made it for him himself, meticulously controlling every step, grinding the beans, pulling the perfect espresso shot, steaming the milk, creating a simple piece of latte art. When he handed the cup to the customer, the man's face lit up with a smile of pure satisfaction. "This is the best latte I've ever had in Seattle," he said. What happened next exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. A flood of customers poured into the store, the line snaking out the door and down the street. By the afternoon, Schultz's voice was hoarse from explaining the different drinks to curious customers. The staff was run off their feet, but every single one of them had a massive grin on their face. That evening, when Schultz tallied the numbers, the store's daily sales were 3 times higher than any other Starbucks location. He excitedly called Jerry to report the incredible news, convinced that this would finally change the founders' minds. Jerry's reaction was a crushing blow. "Howard, we've already discussed this," Jerry said, his voice calm and resolute. "We are not changing the direction of Starbucks. This was just an experiment, and it doesn't prove anything in the long run. We still believe that Starbucks should focus on the bean business." After that conversation, Schultz fell into a deep despair. He began to doubt his own judgment and wondered if he should just leave Starbucks. It was a drizzly Saturday afternoon in the spring of 1985. Schultz was playing basketball at a local court, trying to burn off his frustration. The rift between him and the founders had grown wider than ever. During a break, he ran into a lawyer named Scott Greenberg, whom he had met a few times before. "Howard, you don't look too happy," Greenberg said with concern. Schultz hesitated, then decided to be brutally honest. He poured out his story, the difficulties at Starbucks, his vision for an espresso bar culture, and the brick wall he kept hitting. Greenberg listened intently, nodding along. When Schultz finished, he said something that would change Schultz's life forever. "Howard, why don't you start your own company? I can help you find investors." The words hit Schultz like a thunderclap. But Scott, I don't have enough money, and I have no experience starting a business. Money can be raised, experience can be learned, Greenberg replied. But an opportunity like this won't wait for you forever. If you truly believe in this, you have to go after it. That night, Schultz and Sherry sat at their kitchen table for a life-altering conversation. Sherry was now 6 months pregnant with their first child. Sherry, I know this is the worst possible time to talk about starting a business, Schultz said, holding his wife's hand. But I have this overwhelming feeling that if I don't seize this moment, I will regret it for the rest of my life. Sherry looked at the unwavering determination in her husband's eyes and was silent for a long time. Finally, she said, Howard, I didn't marry you for your stable job. I married you for your dreams and your passion. If this is what you truly want, I'm with you. At the end of 1985, Schultz officially resigned from Starbucks. He founded his own company, Il Giornale, Italian for the daily. The dream was intoxicating, but the reality was a harsh sobriety check. He needed $400,000 to open his first store, and so began his long, painful journey of fundraising. Day after day, he would meet with different investors, passionately pitching his business plan. Most of them weren't interested. Coffee shops? The market is too niche. Americans will never embrace Italian-style coffee culture. You have no experience in the restaurant industry. It's too risky. The constant stream of rejections was demoralizing. But then Greenberg introduced him to a physician named Jack Rogers. Dr. Rogers listened carefully to his plan, asked insightful questions, and at the end decided to invest $100,000. Schultz was so overcome with emotion, he nearly wept. It was his first external investment. With that crucial vote of confidence, he redoubled his efforts, and after months of relentless pitching, he finally raised the $400,000 he needed. In April 1986, the first Il Giornale opened in Seattle's Columbia Center. The night before the grand opening, Schultz stayed in the shop until 3 a.m., checking every single detail. On opening day, he stood at the entrance in his best suit, greeting the first customers. His hands were clammy, his heart pounded in his chest. The first customer was a young woman who ordered a cappuccino. As he handed her the cup, she took a sip, and a smile spread across her face. "This is really, really good," she said. In that moment, Schultz knew his dream was finally starting to become a reality. Which leads us to our final story, the ordeal of 242 rejections and a new definition of freedom. In the months after Il Giornale opened, Schultz quickly learned the vast chasm between a dream and a business. Customer traffic was inconsistent. Cash flow was a nightmare. By the 6th month, Schultz did the math and realized that at their current burn rate, the company had maybe 3 months of life left. He had to raise more money. This round of fundraising was even more brutal than the first. It was a marathon of humility and rejection. He vividly remembers one particularly painful meeting. After his pitch to a well-known venture capital firm, the investment manager looked at him blankly and said, "Mr. Schultz, we don't believe there is a sufficient market in America for Italian-style coffee. Furthermore, your company's current financial situation is dire. We will not be investing." That night, driving home, Schultz stopped at a red light, leaned his forehead against the steering wheel, and just cried. He started to doubt everything, his judgment, his ability, his entire vision. When he got home, Sherry saw the look on his face, said nothing, and simply wrapped him in a hug. "Did I make a mistake?" he asked his wife. "Howard," she said softly, "do you remember when we first moved to Seattle, how you would come home every night and share all the new things you were learning at Starbucks? Your eyes had a light in them. It's hard right now. I know it is. But I can still see that light." Her words were the fuel he needed to keep going. Schultz pressed on. He started approaching smaller investors. His former boss, ex-colleagues, even his barber invested a few $1,000s. Every single investment, no matter how small, felt like a monumental victory. And then, an unexpected phone call changed everything. One afternoon in March 1987, the phone rang. It was Jerry Baldwin. "Howard, I have some news for you." Jerry's voice sounded weary. "We've decided to sell Starbucks." The founders, due to their own disagreements over the company's direction, had decided to go their separate ways. "Who are you selling to?" Schultz asked, his heart beginning to pound. "We haven't decided yet. We want to find someone who truly understands the value of Starbucks. Howard, are you interested?" The question made his heart leap into his throat. Acquiring Starbucks was a dream he had never dared to entertain. But there was one colossal problem. He needed nearly $4 million to do it. The next morning, he called Jerry back. "Jerry, I want to buy Starbucks. Give me 1 month to raise the money." It was the biggest gamble of his life. The next 30 days were the most intense he would ever experience. He had to raise a truly astronomical sum. This time, his story was more complete. He wasn't just selling the idea of Il Journal. He was selling an integrated vision for the future of coffee in America. But even so, the rejection still far outnumbered the acceptances. As Schultz would later recall, in the process of raising money to buy Starbucks, he approached a total of 242 potential investors. 217 of them said no. His success rate was less than 10%. Each no was a blow to his confidence. But at a critical moment, one of his earliest supporters, a man who would later become a key director at Starbucks, Bill Gates Sr., the father of the Microsoft founder, stepped in. Not only did he invest personally, but he also used his reputation to help convince other skeptical investors. Finally, in the last week before the deadline, a miracle happened. The $4 million was secured. On August 18, 1987, the acquisition of Starbucks was officially complete. Schultz stood in front of the original Starbucks store, holding the check, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. 2 years ago, he had walked away from this place. Now, he was back, not as an employee, but as its owner. On his first day as the new owner of Starbucks, Schultz made a decision that shocked everyone. He was going to completely abandon the Il Journal brand, the very company he had bled for, and rename all of his stores Starbucks. "Why?" his partners demanded. "Il Journal is your baby. Why would you give it up?" Schultz's reply revealed his first profound understanding of financial freedom. Entrepreneurship isn't about proving how smart you are. It's about creating the most value. The name Starbucks has more history, more cultural equity than Il Journal. My job isn't to protect my own ego. It's to make the right decision. This was the first truth. Real financial freedom isn't about stubbornly clinging to your own ideas, but about the flexibility to adapt to what the market truly values. The next few months were a difficult period of integration, compounded by crushing financial pressure. He had taken on immense debt to buy the company. The new Starbucks had to grow, and it had to grow fast. Then, on a winter day in 1988, he heard something that shook him to his core. A part-time employee had been forced to quit because she got sick and couldn't afford her medical bills without health insurance. The story instantly transported him back 30 years to his father lying helpless on the couch. His father, trapped by an injury with no insurance. Now the same thing was happening in his own company. That night, he discussed it with Sherry. "I don't want my employees to ever experience the pain my father went through," he said. "I want to give all of them, including part-timers, health insurance." "But Howard, that will be a massive expense," Sherry gently reminded him. "The company's finances are still so fragile. Are you sure we can afford this?" "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but I know it's the right thing to do. And I believe that if you're good to your people, they'll be good to the business." In late 1988, Schultz announced a revolutionary new policy. Starbucks would provide comprehensive health insurance to all employees who work 20 hours or more a week, including part-timers. In the cutthroat business world of the 1980s, the decision was seismic. At a board meeting, one investor confronted him directly. "Schultz, are you running a business or a charity? This policy will dramatically increase our costs and hurt our profitability." But Schultz held his ground. He explained to the board that this policy would lower employee turnover, boost morale, and most importantly, it was aligned with the core values of the company they were trying to build. His judgment proved to be prophetic. After the health insurance policy was implemented, employee turnover at Starbucks plummeted from the industry average of 400% to just 60%. In 1991, Schultz introduced an even more radical idea, the Beanstalk program. All employees, again including part-timers, would be granted stock options in the company. To emphasize this new philosophy, Starbucks officially changed the title of its employees from employees to partners. The effect of this change was staggering. The staff began to treat their work with a true sense of ownership. For example, the Frappuccino, now one of the most popular drinks in the world, was originally the idea of a store manager in California. When Schultz heard about it, he immediately rolled it out nationwide. This led Schultz to his second deep understanding of financial freedom. True freedom isn't achieved through one person's solitary effort, but by building a system where many people are motivated to work for the system's success. In 1992, Starbucks successfully went public on the NASDAQ. On the day of the IPO, Schultz stood on the trading floor, watching the stock price soar. But what excited him more was the knowledge that thousands of his partners held stock options. The IPO made many of them a significant amount of money. That night, Starbucks hosted a celebration party in Seattle. A part-time barista named Mary approached Schultz, her eyes filled with tears. "Howard, thank you," she said. "I never thought someone like me could ever own stock in a company. Now I can give my kids a better education." In that moment, Schultz finally understood the ultimate meaning of financial freedom. It's not about one person becoming rich. It's about enabling many people to succeed because of your success. And this was Schultz's third and most profound truth. Real financial freedom is the ability to create value in a way that benefits all stakeholders. So, after hearing Howard Schultz's story, I think your understanding of financial freedom might have changed. He journeyed from the housing projects of Brooklyn to the heights of corporate America in just one decade. But more importantly, he redefined what true financial freedom means along the way. Let's quickly recap the three powerful lessons he discovered. Lesson 1. The price of freedom is proportional to the reward. Schultz was willing to give up a secure $75,000 salary. He was willing to endure 217 rejections. He was willing to take on nearly $4 million in debt. It was precisely because he dared to pay a price that most people wouldn't that he achieved a result most people can't. The first step toward financial freedom is having the courage to accept the corresponding risk and responsibility. Lesson 2. Shift from self-satisfaction to value creation. The original founders of Starbucks wanted to run a small and beautiful business, making coffee that they loved. Schultz aimed for scale, making a coffee experience that the market needed. True financial freedom comes from creating value that other people need, not just from pursuing what you personally love. Lesson 3. Go from needing others to being needed by others. The highest level of financial freedom is building a system where everyone is invested in its success. Through policies like health insurance and Beanstalk, Schultz transformed his employees into partners, creating a self-propelling business ecosystem. When the value you create is big enough, the world will work for your success. But Schultz's story teaches us one final, crucial lesson. Financial freedom isn't about earning the right to be idle. It's about earning the ability to take on greater responsibilities and create even greater value. So now, I want to ask you a few questions. To achieve your version of financial freedom, what price are you truly willing to pay? Is the work you're doing right now primarily for your own interest, or is it to create value that others desperately need? And what kind of system could you build that would make more people invested in your success? There are no easy answers to these questions, but the process of thinking about them is the beginning of your own journey toward freedom. Remember Schultz's awakening on that stormy night. As long as you feel your destiny is controlled by someone else, you will never be truly free. To break that cycle, you don't need smarter investment tips or better budgeting apps. You need to rethink your relationship with money, risk, and success. You need the courage to leave your comfort zone, the wisdom to create real value, and the vision to make others succeed alongside you. From a 28-year-old salesman to a 38-year-old entrepreneur, Howard Schultz proved in 1 decade that financial freedom is not an outcome. It is a capacity, the capacity to create value, to bear responsibility, and to empower others. When you possess that capacity, financial freedom is just a natural consequence. I hope you can find your own Starbucks, and on your journey to freedom, become the best version of yourself. This is Fanko. If you've made it this far, thank you for sharing your time with me. If this story has shifted your perspective, let me know by hitting the like button and share in the comments, what is one aspect of your life you're looking to change? What risk are you prepared to take to chase your dream? Your interaction is what fuels this channel. I'll see you in the next one.